afternoon, folks. Thank you for joining us. This session is about Azure Stack HCI, so hopefully you're in the right room. If not, you do have the chance to leave, but I will remember you if you leave early. My name is Sarah Lean, and I'm the founder of the Glasgow Azure User Group and an Azure MVP later transitioning. I should have been doing this talk with my friend Lisa Clark, but unfortunately she's ill, so you'll see references to Lisa in the deck because she helped me build this, and we should have been here in person. So I do have a unicorn instead of Lisa, which is the national animal of Scotland, which is where I'm from. So that's my replacement to Lisa. I think that's a compliment. Hopefully she takes it that way. Folks, when we talk about cloud nowadays, we're thinking more towards the hybrid environments and multi-cloud scenarios. And when we look at some of the data, we're saying about 90% of organizations are going hybrid and relying on hybrid. And then there's also stats around multi-cloud that says 93% of organizations and enterprises are looking towards that multi-cloud strategy, and for a variety of reasons. What I want to do is make this a bit interactive, so I would love to know, first of all, if you know what Azure Stack HCI is. So show of hands. It's a good show. What about hybrid? Are you using hybrid in your organizations? Okay, that's good. What about multi-cloud? Are you using that? Good show of hands, good mix of people within the organization. When we talk about moving towards these kind of strategies, there's various different reasons, like I said, for people picking hybrid or multi-cloud. You know, there's the traditional ones around regulatory, which is really hard for a Scottish person to say, reasons around not being able to move data into the cloud, or just that little bit of uneasiness around moving your data into the cloud. Also, other organisations are staying kind of with the on-prem footprint because they've invested in a data centre. They've got that footprint. They've got a custom-built, fancy room that cools everything, that's powered, and you know, it's hopefully modern, and they don't want to lose that investment. There's no point having an empty room and everything in the cloud when you've got that building there. So there's lots of reasons for using them. Would anybody like to share the reason their organisation is maybe going hybrid? Let's start to get other people talking in the session. There is stickers and shortbread here for you if you are brave enough to put your hand up and speak. We've got my able assistant Carol with the microphone if anybody wants to share why their organisation is going hybrid.
Hey Sarah,
Hiya.
First of all, lovely to see you speaking in person
Okay.
in Ignite. I've never seen you speak yet. Plenty of online talk though. I suppose from what I can see is a lot of people are going over to hybrid to alleviate the pressures of on-premise infrastructure. So they want to kind of offboard that to the cloud and not have the I suppose the expenditure on-prem. So if they can move it over, they'll do that, and they'll have maybe less expenses and be able to focus more on what they need to leave on-prem and just move it over to the cloud.
Yep, absolutely. Anybody else want to share their reason, maybe why they've went hybrid in their organisation? Oh, we've got one over here, Carol.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it was a conscious decision. I think similar to what that gentleman was saying, it was more that we had a kind of lot of organic growth stuff that was just mashed together, which we all call legacy or technical debt. And I think the view was that spending the time to re-engineer, refactor, make it all nice so it can run in the cloud just wasn't really practical. And we didn't really think there was a lot of value in it. So it was more, okay, well, let's extend into the cloud, start using that, but then have things like Express Route or VPNs wherever required, and keep that there. And then eventually just kind of, the eventual thing we want to do is kind of just cut that away eventually.
Yep, and I think that's another great reason that other people move towards hybrid. It's organic. Some people maybe spin up an Azure subscription with a credit card and start doing things in the cloud, and suddenly it becomes dev and then test and then it's production, and the whole organisation has to adopt hybrid as a kind of standpoint as well. So there's lots of reasons, good and bad, for moving hybrid and multi-cloud scenarios. Now, as today's session is all about Azure Stack HCI, I want to kind of cover off what Azure Stack HCI is, because a few of you didn't put your hands up when I asked if you knew what it was, so let's make sure we've got a level playing field. Azure Stack HCI is a great solution that the team have invented, taking the best of what we love from Windows Server, and I am a massive fan of Windows Server. It served me well in my career. But then the team have also taken the great things from Azure that we're all looking to use and leverage and melded them together. And Azure Stack HCI has come along with hybrid in mind. It's been designed with the best of Windows Server, things we're all using, and Azure together. There's lots of different reasons for kind of using Azure Stack HCI. That legacy knowledge that you might have around Windows Server, you can spin up Azure Stack HCI and quickly get on board with it. You don't need to go and read the documentation, or maybe you might, maybe you won't, but it's that familiar operating system, that familiar look and feel for you. Building on technologies that you've already used, potentially Hyper-V, Storage Spaces Direct, that is there for you. So it's an easy adoption route into potentially Azure and other modes as well. The other great thing about it is it's always moving forward. Windows Server is fantastic, but we've all had that issue where we have to upgrade to get the newest, latest features from, say, Windows Server 2008 to 2022. You've had to do that horrible upgrade path of figuring out, do we do an in-place upgrade? Do we then have to spin up new hardware to get those new features? Do we have to migrate everything across? All of that pain is kind of eliminated with Azure Stack HCI because the features are constantly rolling out. And when I talk about some of the announcements that they've made this week around the Azure Stack HCI, you'll see some of the new things that are happening quite quickly with Azure Stack HCI that will potentially have to wait for the next version of Windows Server 2023, 4, whatever they're going to call it, to actually land for us. So we can constantly move with the times and the feedback that we're getting. The team are listening to the feedback from people who are using Azure Stack HCI and building that into their updates. So there's lots of reasons for Azure Stack HCI and really what it can do within your business. Now, as I said, Azure Stack HCI was invented to take advantage of the best of both worlds, so Windows Server and Azure. And that's where Azure Arc can kind of come into play as well, to try and make it a management plane and consistent for us when we're using the hybrid environments. If we're using hardware, we're also using Azure when we're in the hybrid environment. And with Azure Arc, putting those two together makes it sure that we can actually leverage the Azure portal. So your Azure Stack HCI cluster will be available inside your Azure portal. And some of the features that are coming along mean that you can actually administrate and use your Azure Stack HCI from the Azure portal without touching your Azure Stack HCI cluster on-prem. So it's giving you that consistent management plane, that one management plane. I know it's a bit of a marketing buzzword to talk about the one management plane, but it does help you in your day-to-day job. The last thing you want to be doing is changing from different management planes, opening up different consoles, having to log in. If you're in the Azure portal doing something, you can also look after your Azure Stack HCI cluster as well. So it's just that time management, it's making things a lot better for you. The Azure Arc component also gives you that ability to bring some of your Azure services to your Azure Stack HCI on-prem as well and integrate with it. So there's been a lot of announcements. I spent last night catching up with all the announcements that the team have announced. And I want to kind of update you because I think at Ignite we always get a slew of announcements, get lots of things happening, and it's really hard to absorb all of it. So hopefully I'll give you some of the highlights of what's been happening and what's been announced. So one of the first things that they've kind of announced is they're making it easier for you to move from Windows Server to Azure Stack HCI. And what that really means is two things that caught my attention. So one is around licensing. So let me get this right, because there's lots of acronyms in this, but if you have an enterprise agreement with software assurance, then you can actually switch your Windows Server licenses to actually become Azure Stack HCI licenses. So effectively making it free to actually use Azure Stack HCI instead. So again, if you have an EA agreement with SA, then you can switch your licensing around to make it into Azure Stack HCI. So for those enterprise organizations that have that agreement already in place, it should hopefully be a lot easier for you to adopt. And it's not about that conversation about how much is it going to cost. It's just a conversation you have to have about switching the license around. I will caveat that with, I am not a licensed expert, so always speak to your licensing expert and the people that can read the terms and conditions before you do that, but that is hopefully going to make it easier for you to adopt Azure Stack HCI versus Windows Server. Now, something that's coming along, hopefully in the early months of next year, is actually making Azure Migrate able to assess your environments and help you migrate to Azure Stack HCI. Now, anyone that knows me knows that I love Azure Migrate. It's probably one of my favourite products inside the Azure suite. And that will really be able to help you understand what you have and help you migrate into the Azure Stack HCI world as well. So it's a fantastic addition to that product that will hopefully make it easier again for you to migrate into Azure Stack HCI. Before I keep talking, I want to check who is actually running HCI inside their production environments. Is there a lot of units out there? Okay, few sales opportunities here, potentially. Looking towards, again, the new announcements that have been happening at Ignite is something that was confused me initially until I read into it. So we've got Azure Arc enabled VM management public preview 2. So the eagle eye among you will notice it's public preview 2. Why has it got a version? Because it's the second iteration of it. We've actually had Arc-enabled VM management before. It came out in March earlier this year, and that was allowing you to go inside your Azure portal, click on a couple of buttons, and actually deploy virtual machines to your Azure Stack HCI without really logging into your Azure Stack HCI. What's happened is lots of folk have given feedback around all of that, and we've got public preview 2, which gives us extra additional features. And I also read that they're working on public preview 3 as well. So the team are definitely listening to what's happening and seeing the insights that people are using this. And again, this makes it easier for you to be able to interact with what's happening within your environment. You're using that one management plane for everything again, and Azure is that core service that's making it happen. So inside this public preview 2, something that's new is the ability to actually access virtual machine images from the Azure Marketplace. So there's a couple of Microsoft images there for you. So the key ones are around Windows Server Azure Edition. So now Azure Stack HCI supports running the Windows Server Azure Edition. We'll not talk about why there's an Azure edition of Windows Server, but there is. Azure Stack HCI now supports that, and you can grab the image and deploy that to your Azure Stack HCI, so you don't have to go through the pain of making that image for you. More importantly, we also have the Windows 10 or Windows 11 multi-session image for when you're using Azure Virtual Desktop within Azure Stack HCI, so you can start to use that as well. So it's pretty cool. It's hopefully going to help you being able to deploy things a lot quicker into your environment and save you time and save you the pain of having to figure out how to build an image. Now, the images hopefully are adapted to be able to download quickly to your environment, and you only need to download it once. You download it once and then you can use it multiple times, so it's not like you have to download it every time from Azure when you want to deploy it. Now, alongside this, we have guest management and virtual machine extensions as well. So we've got the addition of custom script extension, we've got domain join, obviously for your Azure virtual desktops as well, and Azure policy as well. On the roadmap, the team are looking to add extra extensions as well. Again, extending your Azure services that you're probably already using to your virtual machines inside Azure Stack HCI. So that's really good, keeping things consistent. Again, I'm going to keep saying it again, that one management plane, you're constantly having the same thing. You're not having to adopt new services for your Azure Stack HCI. So when I said before, Azure Stack HCI was able to keep feature rich and keep you going and not have to wait for things for the new edition like we do with Windows Server. We've got a new edition out this week, so 22 H2. That's really not easy to say. It's out and should be available for you on your HCI clusters right now. It's an over-the-air update, so if you do Windows Update, you should be able to get it down. I think it's going to take them a few weeks to make it as a downloadable, so you can create new clusters from it, but it should be available right now as an over-the update. And inside there, there's lots of different things that's additions and mostly around networking, to be honest. Networking is not my speciality, so I'm not going to dig into it, but there's lots of features inside of that. And actually, when you read into some of the announcements, they're already working on the next edition of HCI. So 23H2 is actually out in preview as well, so we can start to think about that if you haven't already looked at it. So the team are constantly moving. We're not stationary with Azure Stack HCI. And the last big announcement, or second last announcement, is around some of the Azure Kubernetes services within HCI as well. I think there's a bit of a name change here. They're saying Azure Hybrid again with this, but there's lots of additions in the AKS service as well. I think the big one is that the default container, the Linux container, is going to be Marina or Marinera. I've heard it's pronounced different ways. Version 2 is going to be there, and it's a much smaller image as well for you. Again, there's a lot more inside these announcements that I haven't mentioned, but hopefully you can dig into the details later on and find the relevant ones for you. Now, Lisa will hate me for the next slide because she doesn't like having hardware in her slide deck. She likes pretty diagrams instead. However, I'm a hardware geek. I love my hardware, and the big announcement that I noticed was that Microsoft are actually making their own Azure Stack HCI hardware. Now, the naming's fun, so it's called Azure Stack HCI Pro 2, and they've shortened it to Pro 2. So that's going to be fun when we start to talk about some of the Pro devices, like the Surface Pro. I think we're on 9. Did they announce 9 this week? So thankfully we're in different versioning. But this is hardware that you're going to be able to order through the Azure portal, and it'll be coming from Microsoft. It'll be shipped from them, and it will come pre-built with Azure Stack HCI. And it's pretty cool that you can order it through the Azure portal, much like you do with Azure Data Box if you wanted one of those inside your environment. Hang on a second, we'll get Carol with your microphone.
I'm sure I'm not the only one. I mean, have you got the inside track on getting the materials needed to put inside that thing? Because if you have, I'm probably going to buy one.
It is actually pretty cool.
Are shocking, aren't they, at the moment for hardware? That's a massive challenge. So,
yeah,
let me know.
I don't think this is going to launch until 2023, and the specs are a bit quiet at the moment. They're saying there's going to be various different configurations. They have announced that it's going to be a 2U server that will be wall mountable. So that's pretty cool. I wonder how cheap it will be if it can be a lab server for me at home, if I can slide that in the husband retail, but maybe not. But this is something that you can just order direct from Microsoft inside the Azure portal. So that's another way of being able to get the Azure Stack HCI boxes and hopefully make it a little more easy for you to adopt. But again, we'll see how the pipeline is. We'll see how long it takes to get one actually within the portal. I'm being waved here. I think we've got a question online.
Yeah, we've got a couple of online questions here for you, Sarah. Is there any plan to offer Azure AD as a service from Azure Stack HCI?
Not that I'm aware of.
Right, okay. And second one is, can you run VMware AVS on Azure Stack HCI?
Not that I'm aware of.
That would make sense, yes. Yeah. And can you connect Azure Stack HCI with public Azure via Azure Arc? So can you use it all with Azure Arc?
It should be already connected, so I'm not sure what that.
So that's
quite
probably,
about the
probably
question.
A yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, opening up to questions. If anybody has any questions, one away up the back there, Carol, please.
Thanks, Sarah.
Hello.
You flashed up hardware just quickly previously, but I was wondering about talking about edge use cases where people maybe don't have a choice.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you there, sorry.
Edge use cases for compute at the edge where people don't have a choice to be hybrid or not.
Yeah.
Anything in the pipeline or thinking about small compute for small environments where they need something that could potentially run PaaS services at the edge?
There is a few devices out there. Now, Kenny's sitting in the audience and he noticed on a slide there was an unknown device. So it'll be interesting to see what the team are doing, but it's definitely a space that I think they're looking into. I can't obviously talk to what they're doing, but I definitely think there's more to come from the team, especially given that they've just announced that they're doing hardware for Azure Stack HCI. So it'll be interesting to see where they go, because it's definitely a space they haven't addressed at the moment. And like you say, there are lots of use cases. So again, if that's something that you have a use case for, tell the team, reach out to them on Twitter, reach out to them through your account providers, because that's the way you do get features to happen inside Azure these days. Tell them that you need them, to be honest. Any other questions, folks? Oh, got one here.
Yes, another one is what happens to your SQL on-premises licenses when you migrate to HCI? I suppose you could generalize that to licenses generally.
Yeah, licensing.
Yeah, licensing generally. So is it hybrid benefit or do you just move them over?
I think hybrid benefit still applies within Azure Stack HCI. Again, I'm not a licensing expert, so you do have to look at that. And there's lots of different edge cases about whether you have software assurance, whether you don't have, all that kind of good stuff. I would definitely reach out to your account execs and speak to those people. And there should be great documentation on some of this as well, on the licensing as well. I try to stay away from licensing, like I'm sure a lot of you do, but yeah, there should be lots of options there available.
Thanks.
Have you got questions for me, folks? Because I've got questions for you if you don't. You got one? Yep. Carol, we've got one over here.
So you talked about migrate. So would that include going from VMware, for example? Because that's obviously a really popular on-prem hypervisor option. So is that something that migrate would handle? Because I know migrate is primarily kind of pushing up to cloud.
So I think if you use Azure Migrate right now, you can assess your VMware environment and move it into Azure IaaS or the Azure version of VMware. I don't know if the route quite is there from VMware to Azure Stack HCI at the moment. From what I understand from this announcement, it's more taking your Windows Server Hyper-V environments to Azure Stack HCI. I haven't seen any actual like screenshots or rendering of what the announcement is. It's coming out in January, I believe. But there are other ways you could maybe use Azure Migrate to understand what you've got and assess it. I've got lots of blogs on that if you want to check that out.
Yeah, will do. Thank you.
Yep.
How does the upgrade cycle work for the hardware component?
For updating the hardware, like physically getting a new unit.
No, just like, Patch Tuesday kind of thing. Like how, the whole point of going past SaaS is you don't have to manage those things. Now you've got a bit of hardware that you've then got to manage again.
Yeah, that's probably one of the maybe downsides if you want to look at it from that with Azure Stack HCI. You still have to. Kenny's champing at the bit to answer the question. Carol, could you give Kenny the microphone, please? He's right there.
Well, the short answer is it depends on the OEM that you buy the hardware from. Some of them have integrated lifecycle management built into Windows Admin Center, so you can do like a one-click upgrade of all the hardware components and the Azure Stack HCI OS in there as well. If you go to the Azure Stack HCI catalog, there's a list of all the vendors there, split into two sections. There are validated nodes and integrated systems. The integrated system vendors have that lifecycle management built in, so you can just say, click, and it will get all the available BIOS drivers, firmware updates, all the available Azure Stack HCI OS updates, and apply them in one go with no workload downtime as well. So that's one of those things that's built in as well.
There you go. Thank you, Kenny. Any other questions, folks? Oh, we've got one here.
Yeah, one question is, what is the difference between, or what are the main differences between Azure Stack HCI and Azure Stack Hub?
Oh,
we're going in. Too long a question.
So Lisa and I debated whether we would talk about the Azure Stack family, because before we originally had Azure Stack, and then we've had all these various different products. That would definitely be a question for Lisa, because that was her specialist subject. But I think Azure Stack HCI has so many use cases nowadays, and is a feature and really where the team are developing, where they're going. So where the other products are going, I'm not sure.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Oh, got one there.
Hi, Sarah.
Hello.
You flashed up on one of your slides about the add-ons that are coming into preview, and Defender was up on it, and it reminded me of the recent announcement about Defender for servers, that you have to buy it through CSP now and has to be connected in. Do you think that's the direction this is going in with Azure Stack, where any hybrid scenario must be supported through Azure Stack on premise? And I'm thinking about stuff like, Exchange Hybrid, for example, if you go that way. Is it going to have to sit on Azure Stack to be supported? I think that it's a very extreme way of doing things. I'd be worried about that.
I don't think so, because that's almost pushing you down a certain route, and I've never seen Microsoft push you down a certain route like that, to be honest. And I think there's still lots of reasons and plays and features to still use like Windows Server and things like that for that technology. So I don't think Azure Stack HCI is going to be the default for everything anytime soon. Although maybe in a year's time you'll be replaying this clip and I'll be proved wrong, but no, I don't think so. Oh, hang on, I'm getting the microphone.
You're saying about, that your Windows Server licenses can be converted into Azure Stack licenses. That's an immediate roadmap there to say.
Personally, I think they've done that just to enable adoption, to remove that blocker, because I think it was a blocker for people moving because they had Windows Server licenses. So why would they pay for extra licenses of another product? And that's always that hard conversation with the bean counters, isn't it, about that? So I really just think it's an unblocker. I don't think it's a reason that they're forcing you all down this and suddenly Windows Server will disappear, personally. But yeah. Any other questions, folks? So when I asked if anybody was using Azure Stack HCI, there wasn't a lot of hands put up. Is Azure Stack HCI something that you are looking at potentially on the roadmap? Hands up. Okay. Does anybody share why they're not using Azure Stack HCI and why you maybe went down the Windows Server route? Is anybody brave enough to share those reasons? Oh, I've got a volunteer. Oh.
Mainly legacy environments, all running on VMware environments at the minute.
Okay, good enough reason. There was another one, Carol, up here.
I'll qualify this in the fact that I'm now pre-sales at a distributor. I used to have a proper job in IT, but I don't do that anymore. Tried to build it January, February this year with Lisa's help. The wizard is not fit for purpose. The PowerShell doesn't feel mature enough.
Okay.
She directed us to Jaromir Kasper's Git. Superb.
Yep.
Still even had problems with that. So it's Dell hardware. It's plugged into our Azure environment. We're trying to build a AVD hybrid. It just feels not ready.
Okay, that's interesting. I think Kenny would love a conversation with you because he's from Dell and Yaromir's boss. So
can't speak highly enough of him.
Yeah.
Absolutely superb. But I then gave it to a more competent PowerShell expert within our organisation who's finished the build, but we still don't know. Seems niche.
Yeah, potentially. I have used Yaromir's walkthrough and it's fantastic. Does take a lot of time. There's a lot of configuration. I don't think that's obviously Yaromir's fault. I think that's obviously the Azure Stack HCI team's configuration route. But yeah, potentially that is a blocker because it's that wee bit more that you have to do, potentially. What I would say, one of the announcements I did not mention is if you've ever looked at the Azure Arc Jumpstart website, they've now released an HCI box. So you can go on there, click on a template, it deploys an Azure Stack HCI environment in your Azure subscription with lots of workloads there already. So it's going to give you that feel of an actual production use case. So potentially that's another route to maybe have a look at to get a feel of, and then maybe you can overcome how the setup works. But yeah, that's a good reason. Thanks for the feedback. Anybody else in the room? There's one at the back, Carol.
Hi, this isn't actually a reason not to move to it. Our HCI stack was delivered on Friday, so we're very much at the start of our journey.
Yep.
But the thing we've discovered, we bought through HP and kind of started the journey 2-3 months ago. But what appears to have is now an offer from Microsoft that wasn't there when we started, is there's now a fast track service.
Okay.
So actually, we've now got a full team of people that seem to know the product inside out, helping us design it, deploy it, all that kind of stuff. So I think it looks very complex, and to me as well, but we've actually got all that hand-holding that wasn't available 3 months ago when we started looking at it, but actually would have been helpful from the design perspective. But there is that support there now. So
Excellent.
I think, and they said that's because they'd realised people were finding it difficult to deploy.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm being told that's the end of the session, folks. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and discussing. I've put together a little blog with all the announcements and much more detail of what I've mentioned here today. So please do check that out. And you can follow me on Twitter and Lisa on Twitter as well. Hopefully she gets better soon. But yeah, thank you so much, folks. It's been great having you.